Just end it quick. That's what she told them. When those Hell's Angels pulled up her shirt, they saw what had been burned right into her flesh. You could taste the dust and gasoline hanging in the air that night, and those motorcycle engines were making this deep rumbling sound that bounced all across that empty stretch of desert highway. There was this gas station out there, practically in the middle of nowhere, and its neon lights were flickering on and off. That's when this girl came stumbling into that little circle of light. No shoes on her feet, shaking all over, covered in bruises. She had on this flannel shirt that was just barely hanging off her, and man, it was streaked with dirt and what looked like old dried blood. When you looked into her eyes, they were just empty and wide, like she'd completely forgotten what it felt like to be safe anywhere. The only sounds you could hear were her breathing real shallow-like, and this faint buzzing noise coming from that neon open sign. Then suddenly, out of that pitch-black darkness, here comes this thunder. A whole convoy of motorcycles came roaring down that highway, their headlights cutting through the night like knives. The Hell's Angels had shown up. Now look, if you're someone who still believes in being kind to people, in giving folks a second chance, and in the idea that even the toughest hearts can have compassion in them, then before I keep going with this story, I need you to do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. And hey, tell us down in the comments where you're watching this from, because what I'm about to tell you next is going to remind you that even the roughest, hardest men you'll ever meet can have the deepest sense of humanity buried inside them. So this girl's name was Lena Carter, and she was only 22 years old at the time. But I'm telling you, when you looked into those eyes of hers, you were looking at someone who'd been through absolute hell and back. It was 2 years before this night when she'd been grabbed and kidnapped by this violent outlaw gang that went by the name of the Ravens. Real nasty bunch that got their kicks from making people scared and treating them with pure cruelty. They didn't just steal her freedom away from her. They took who she was as a person. They actually branded her like she was some kind of livestock. Burned their gang symbol right into her skin as their way of sending a message. She was their property now. For months and months, Lena had to endure all kinds of torment, being forced to do what they said, to serve them, just trying to survive day by day. But on this particular night, something inside her just broke. Or maybe it finally woke up. She managed to escape, bleeding and scared out of her mind, running through that desert with nothing except the clothes she had on and this desperate will to stay alive. When she saw those motorcycles coming toward her, the first thing that went through her mind was pure panic. Oh God, another gang, another nightmare starting all over again. She just dropped right down to her knees on that cold concrete, holding her ribs where the pain was pulsing with every single breath she took. When those bikes slowed down and formed a circle all around her, she managed to whisper through her lips that were trembling so bad, "Just kill me fast. Please, just do it quick." Her voice sounded so raw and hollow, like every bit of hope had been completely drained, right out of her. The guy leading this group was a man who went by the name Jackson Reaper Cole, and he climbed off his Harley and stood there. He had this long hair that hung down past his shoulders, and his arms were covered in tattoos that seemed to crawl all the way down to his hands. His eyes were sharp when he looked at you, but there wasn't any meanness in them. Over all his years riding, he'd witnessed plenty of things: blood, people betraying each other, all kinds of violence. But there was something about this broken girl kneeling in front of him that hit him in a different way than anything else ever had. She wasn't just frightened. She was completely destroyed, shattered into pieces. While she stayed there on her knees shaking, Reaper started walking toward her real slow and careful. He tried telling her that she was safe now, that nobody there was going to hurt her. But I guess his words just sounded like some foreign language she couldn't understand. When he reached out to try and help her get back on her feet, she jerked away from him, her whole body going stiff with pure terror. Reaper made a signal to his guys to back off and give her space. Then he quietly told his medic, everyone called him Doc, to come take a look at her injuries. But when Doc got down on his knees and started to lift up her torn shirt so he could see what damage had been done, Every single person in that group just froze solid where they stood. Right there, burned into her skin just below her ribs, were these letters that spelled out, "Property of the Ravens." You could tell that burn mark was deep and old, but there wasn't any mistaking what it said. The air around us seemed to get heavier somehow. These were men who'd been around violence their entire lives, and they all just stood there silent, their faces going dark with this quiet kind of rage building up inside them. Lena turned her face away from all of them, and she whispered so quiet you could barely hear her. "They told me I'd never belong to anybody else. They said that even if I got away and escaped, nobody would ever want something that's already been marked like this." Her tears started falling down and hitting that pavement, mixing right in with the dirt under her knees. Reaper's jaw clenched up tight. He didn't say a single word for what felt like a real long time. Finally, he looked down at her and said it real soft, "Not anymore. That's over now." Then he bent down and lifted her up gentle as he could and carried her right into that gas station diner. Those neon lights kept flickering up above them while he settled her down into one of the booths. His crew positioned themselves over by the door, standing guard. They brought her some food and water, then backed off to give her some room to breathe. Little by little, bit by bit, Lena started opening up and telling them everything that had happened to her. She told them about being grabbed and taken, about all those nights of being abused, the threats they'd made against her, how they'd branded her like an animal, and finally how she'd managed to fight back and get away. Those angels just sat there and listened without saying a word. When she got to the end of her story, Reaper pushed himself up to his feet and said just one thing to his men. No one does that kind of thing to a woman and gets to walk away from it. What came next happened fast and quiet. Look, the Hells Angels weren't exactly saints or anything, but they lived by their own code of honor. They tracked down where the Raven crew had their compound set up, and they got there right before the sun came up. When those engines came roaring up outside the Ravens' hideout, those guys didn't even have enough time to figure out what was happening. What went down at that place never made it onto any news report. But I can tell you that by the time the sun rose up that morning, the Raven crew just didn't exist anymore. Back over at that gas station, Lena opened her eyes to the smell of fresh coffee and felt this warmth from a blanket that someone had wrapped around her shoulders. The angels hadn't taken off and left her there alone. They'd stayed right there with her. Reaper was sitting in the seat across from her, quiet like he usually was. She asked him if he'd hurt those men, and all he said back was, "They won't be hurting anyone ever again." In the days after that, the angels took it upon themselves to keep Lena protected. They brought her back to their clubhouse, and she stayed in this small guest room they had there. It even had a lock on the inside of the door. It was a simple thing, just a little lock, but it meant more to her than those guys could probably ever understand. For the first couple of days, she hardly said anything at all. She'd flinch and jump whenever she heard a sudden noise. She stayed away from mirrors, and she'd have these nightmares that were so bad she'd scream herself awake in the middle of the night. But those angels never once looked at her like there was something wrong with her. They just gave her the time she needed. Doc came by every single day to change her bandages, taking care of that scar where the brand had been burned into her skin. One afternoon, she was standing there staring at it in the mirror, and she whispered real quiet, "It's never going to go away, is it?" Reaper was standing there behind her, and he said, "Scars don't just disappear, Lena, but they stop causing you pain once you get to decide for yourself what they're going to mean to you." As time went on, Lena started to heal, slowly but surely. She started doing things around the clubhouse, cooking meals for the guys, helping them clean up their bikes, and every once in a while, you'd even catch a smile on her face. The sound of these rough, loud bikers laughing and carrying on started feeling like some strange kind of family to her. They didn't look at her like she was somebody's property. To them, she was one of their own, part of the crew. Several months down the road, on the same date that marked the anniversary of when she'd escaped, Reaper took Lena to see this tattoo artist that the angels had known and trusted for years. That old brand had faded some over time into this dark scar, but on that particular day, They were going to cover it up with something completely new. Right across where that burn had been, the artist worked his needle and inked in these words: "I am free." The tears just came streaming down her face while she stood there looking at herself in the mirror. For the very first time since all of this had happened, she didn't see herself as just what had been done to her. She saw who she'd actually become. She was a survivor, a fighter. News started getting around about what the angels had done for her. Other women started reaching out. Women who'd been trapped in bad situations, hurt real bad, broken down by life. Lena made a decision right then that she wasn't going to keep running away from her past anymore. She began volunteering down at this shelter for women who'd been abused, and she'd share her own story with them to try and give them some hope that things could get better. Whenever people would ask her how she found the courage inside herself to just keep going day after day, she'd get this smile on her face and say something real simple: "Because somebody out there believed that I was worth saving." Reaper never wanted any credit for what he'd done. He'd just ride past that shelter sometimes, drop off a donation in the box they had there, and then disappear back down the road on his bike. But Lena always knew when he'd been there. She could just tell somehow. One evening, the angels put together this charity ride to raise money for the shelter, and Lena found herself standing up on this small stage in front of hundreds of people who'd shown up. The sun was going down behind those hills, and all those motorcycles were just glowing under that orange sky. She took in this deep breath and started talking. "There was a time when I thought the whole world was just full of monsters and nothing else. But you know what I learned? Sometimes the very people you're most afraid of turn out to be the ones who end up showing you what it really means to be human." You couldn't hear a single sound from that crowd. Just this quiet hum coming from all those engines and the way tears were catching the light on those weathered, tough faces. Reaper was standing way in the back with his arms crossed over his chest, and you could see this faint smile hiding underneath his beard. He didn't need anyone thanking him or anything like that. Just being able to stand there and watch her up on that stage, standing strong like that, was all he needed. Now look, if this story reached in and touched your heart at all, I'm asking you to take just a moment to hit that like button, share this with other people, and subscribe to this channel. Let other folks hear what happened to Lena and help them remember that you can find hope in the most unexpected places you'd never think to look. And before I finish up here, if you believe that our scars don't get to define who we are, but that it's the courage we show when we rise up from them that really matters, go ahead and drop a red heart down there in the comments below. Let's fill up this whole story with love and strength for every single survivor out there who's still fighting their way back to freedom. Because you know what? Sometimes it takes going through the darkest night of your life to reveal the brightest souls that are out there in this world.